Wow, you weren't kidding when you said you wanted a deep dive. This is quite the stack of Chardonnay info you sent our way.
It is quite a collection. Someone's thirsty for some Chardonnay knowledge.
And a good thing, too, because Chardonnay, well, it's full of surprises.
Mhm.
I'll admit, I used to think, I kind of thought it was a bit one-dimensional as a wine, but the more I learn, honestly, the more fascinated I become. It's like the chameleon of the wine world.
It really is Chardonnay's ability to reflect its environment, like its terroir. It's
Mm.
remarkable. And it's what allows Chardonnay to make such diverse wines. You can have a crisp Chablis or like a rich, buttery Napa Chardonnay.
So to really get it then, we need to start at the source. Burgundy, France, right?
Yeah.
Birthplace of this legendary grape.
Yeah, precisely. And not just Burgundy, like generally, but, specific vineyards even. Tiny plots of land in Burgundy. They're called climates. And these climates are meticulously cared for, often by generations of winemakers. And each one has its own unique soil composition, its own microclimate, and these things drastically impact the wine.
You mentioned Domaine Laflave in your notes, specifically their Puligny-Montrachet. I've heard whispers of this wine, like it's legendary.
It is considered one of the most exceptional Chardonnays in the
Ah.
world. Domaine Laflave practices biodynamic viticulture, which is this holistic approach to winemaking that views the vineyard as its own living ecosystem. And they believe this connection to nature lets them make wines that are a pure reflection of their terroir.
Wow, so they're not just making wine, they're almost channeling the essence of that specific place. That's fascinating.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what makes Burgundy so special. It's a region that puts terroir expression above all else.
Okay, but before we get too lost in the vineyards of Burgundy, let's talk about what's in the glass. What kind of aromas and flavors can we expect from a Chardonnay?
Well, that depends entirely on where it's grown and how it's made. But generally, Chardonnay often has aromas of white fruits like apple and pear, citrus notes, lemon and grapefruit, and even tropical fruits like pineapple and mango, especially in warmer climates.
You mentioned pineapple in your notes,
Hmm.
and that's a classic characteristic of warmer climate Chardonnays, like from California's Central Coast. But in Burgundy, you're more likely to get those crisp apple and pear notes.
Absolutely. Cooler climates mean more restrained fruit character, higher acidity, whereas warmer regions let those grapes ripen further. So you get those riper, sometimes tropical fruit flavors.
And then there's that flinty, almost steely quality that some Chardonnays have. Not quite a flavor, more like a,
Minerality.
yes, minerality.
Yeah.
What causes that?
That scaly mineral character, often attributed to the soil, for example, the Camaragian clay soils of Chablis, they contain fossilized oyster shells. And that contributes to that region's, really signature, flinty, mineral-driven style. Imagine that. You're tasting the remnants of an ancient seabed in your glass.
It's incredible to think that something as, I don't know, seemingly simple as soil can have such an impact on the flavor.
It really highlights, that intricate interplay between nature and winemaking. And speaking of winemaking, we can't forget about the role of oak.
Ah, yes, oak. That's where we get those creamy, buttery vanilla notes.
Exactly. Oak aging is a winemaking technique that can add another layer of complexity to Chardonnay. The type of oak used, whether it's new or old, French or American, and how long it's aged in the barrel, it all influences the final flavor.
So a winemaker might choose to age their Chardonnay in oak to enhance its texture, or to add a specific flavor.
Precisely. For example, in Burgundy, a winemaker might use older oak barrels to add a touch of spice and complexity without overpowering the wine's minerality. But in California, where they're known for a bolder Chardonnay, they might use new oak barrels to give it more pronounced vanilla, toast, and even coconut flavors.
That makes sense. It's like choosing the right spice rack for your Chardonnay dish.
I like that analogy. And just like with spices, a little oak goes a long way. Too much can really mask a wine's natural fruit character.
Right, so it's about finding that balance, that harmony between the fruit, the oak, and the terroir.
Absolutely, and that's what makes Chardonnay such an intriguing grape. Every bottle tells a story, a tale woven from sunshine, soil, and the winemaker's artistry.
Speaking of exploring,
Yeah.
you mentioned that even Brazil is starting to make Chardonnay. That piqued my interest. Brazil, with a tropical climate. How does that even work?
It's a fair question. Brazil, with its hot, humid climate, is not the first place you think of for Chardonnay. But there are certain regions, especially at higher altitudes, with cooler microclimates, where producers are crafting some exciting Chardonnay. The Saragocha in southern Brazil, for example, has got a higher elevation, volcanic soils, and they're producing Chardonnays that are really vibrant and fresh,
Yep.
with a distinct mineral edge.
Volcanic soil. Ah, I bet that makes for a unique taste.
Absolutely. The volcanic soil is mineral rich, so it lends a certain complexity and depth to those wines. It's a great example of how adaptable Chardonnay can be, and that it can thrive in some unexpected places.
Speaks to its resilience for sure. So we've got Burgundy, the heartland of Chardonnay, and now Brazil entering the Chardonnay game. But our Chardonnay journey isn't over yet. There's a whole world out there.
Indeed. Our little virtual tasting wouldn't be complete without talking about other notable Chardonnay regions. So let's hop across the pond to California. That's where Chardonnay gets a bolder, more opulent personality.
Ah, California Chardonnay. Sunshine in a glass.
So what sets California apart from, say, Burgundy?
Well, Burgundy really prioritizes terroir expression, but California, it embraces a more fruit-forward, hedonistic style. Warmer temperatures mean the grapes get riper, and that gives the wines those generous fruit aromas, often those ripe pineapple and mango notes we were talking about earlier.
Can't forget about the oak either. California Chardonnay and oak aging go hand in hand.
Right. California winemakers, they aren't afraid to use a lot of oak. And it often results in wines that have a creamy texture, aromas of vanilla, baking spices, and sometimes even a hint of toasted coconut. You mentioned Rami wine cellars in your notes. How are they different than other California producers?
Rami's a great example of a producer that finds that balance, that balance between ripeness and restraint. They really pay attention to vineyard management. And they take a more nuanced approach to oak aging, so their wines are both opulent and elegant.
It's like they're walking that tightrope,
Right.
showcasing that right fruit that California is known for, but still maintaining a sense of, I don't know, finesse balance.
Exactly. And that's what makes exploring all these regions so fun. You see how these winemakers adapt to the climate and their own style.
Like a global conversation about Chardonnay, each region adding its own voice.
So we've got Burgundy, California. We went to Brazil. Where to next on our Chardonnay World Tour?
Let's go south to the land of sunshine and Shiraz, Australia, specifically the Margaret River region, known for its incredible Chardonnay.
Margaret River Chardonnay. Okay. I've had the pleasure. What am I in for? Imagine a Chardonnay that's like the Australian coast, bottled. Margaret River's got this maritime climate, cool breezes, ancient soils, and it makes these Chardonnays that are bursting with bright citrus fruit, white peach, a really distinct saline minerality, like a breath of ocean air in a glass.
Sounds so refreshing. Definitely different from a buttery California Chardonnay.
Totally. Each region has a totally different take on Chardonnay. It's like having a conversation with the same person, but in different languages. The core is the same, but the nuances change.
Love that analogy. I'm realizing Chardonnay isn't just one wine. It's like a whole world. This tapestry of terroirs, winemaking styles, cultures. Remarkable. But before we get too philosophical, I have a question about something we talked about earlier. Lyes aging.
Ah, yes, Lees aging. That's a technique that can make Chardonnay, or really any wine, incredibly textured and complex.
You mentioned it makes Chardonnay almost creamy. How so?
It's all about those little yeast cells. During fermentation, the yeast eats the sugar and turns it into alcohol. But then after fermentation, the yeast dies and settles at the bottom of the tank or barrel. Those dead yeast cells are called lees. And some winemakers will age their Chardonnay on those lees. For a while, let it hang out with the spent yeast cells.
So it's like the wine is taking a bath with the remnants of the party.
In a way, yeah. But this bath isn't about relaxation. It actually changes how the wine is made. The lees release compounds that affect the texture, the complexity, even the aromas of the wine.
Like what kind of aromas?
Well, lees aging can add aromas of bread dough, brioche, toasted nuts, sometimes even a hint of cheese rind. It also rounds out the palate, makes it feel richer, creamier.
Fascinating how something so technical can be so enjoyable in the glass.
Right. It's that science and art together. That's what makes winemaking so cool. And being able to play with texture and flavor like this, with lees aging, that just gives winemakers another tool to craft their Chardonnay.
And speaking of style, we've talked about such a huge range of Chardonnay, from that lean mineral Chablis to a rich California Chardonnay. But what about pairing it with food? That can be tough. Any advice on pairing Chardonnay?
Chardonnay is actually super versatile with food. It can go with a huge range of flavors, from light seafood to much richer dishes.
Where do we even start? What are some go-to Chardonnay pairings?
So generally, you want to match how heavy the wine feels to how heavy the food feels.
I sense so. Lighter Chardonnays with lighter dishes. Fuller-bodied Chardonnays with richer dishes.
You got it. For example, a crisp Chablis with that acidity and minerality, that would be perfect with oysters, grilled fish, even sushi. The wine cuts through the richness of the food.
That sounds like a perfect summer evening.
Right. Now, on the other hand, think about a buttery California Chardonnay and pair that with a creamy mushroom risotto or like a roast chicken with herbs. The richness of the wine and that oak, it just complements the creamy texture and earthy flavors.
Ooh, I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. So Chardonnay can really do it all. Elegant or bold and opulent. On its own or with all kinds of food. It's a chameleon.
Exactly. Chardonnay is a grape that you have to explore to really appreciate. Don't be afraid to try all different styles from all different regions. You might just find a new favorite.
I'm thinking Chardonnay needs to be my new go-to wine. It really seems like there's a Chardonnay for everyone.
I'd have to agree. And you know what's really cool? Chardonnay's story isn't finished yet.
Oh, I like that.
Uh-huh.
Chardonnay's story isn't finished, so what's next for it? What does the future hold for this grape?
Well, we've learned one thing today for sure. Chardonnay is adaptable, so as the climate changes and winemaking changes, I think we're going to see Chardonnay become even more diverse.
How exciting. Can you give us a sneak peek? What kind of trends are you seeing?
I think freshness and vibrancy are going to be key. Winemakers are really into showcasing the natural acidity and minerality.
So moving away from those big, oaky, buttery styles.
Not necessarily completely away from them, but yeah, definitely a shift towards something more balanced, more nuanced, playing with oak differently, a lighter touch, maybe using older barrels to add complexity without losing the fruit.
And what about terroir? We keep coming back to that.
Yeah.
How does that fit into Chardonnay's future?
Terroir is only becoming more important. Wine lovers really care about where their wine comes from, so winemakers are focusing on making their vineyards more sustainable, more biodiverse, to let those unique places really shine through.
So they're crafting wines that tell a story. The story of where they're from, the soil, the climate, everything.
Yes, it's a very holistic way of looking at wine,
Yeah.
considering every step of the process.
This has been an incredible journey, and I feel like I've only just dipped my toes into the world of Chardonnay.
And that's the beauty of it. Always more to discover. Every bottle is a little window into the world of wine. Shows you how amazing Chardonnay can be.
So for anyone listening who's thinking about Chardonnay, maybe they're curious, what's our takeaway for them today?
Don't be afraid to explore it. Try all kinds of Chardonnay. Lean and mineral, rich and buttery, whatever sounds good. Talk to your wine people, ask questions, and most importantly, taste, taste, taste.
Couldn't agree more. Cheers to that.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Chardonnay.